Hey everyone, Mr. Wineland here. Let me kind of just fix this box. All right, so we're going to be talking about the Harding presidency. We kind of went into a little bit about the politics after World War One and some of the changes that had happened in the labor force, as well as the fight of communism. That was near the end of the Wilson administration, as Wilson, you remember, had a stroke, had a heart attack. Um, I guess he just had a stroke, but it basically affected his ability to function as president. And even though he thought he could run for a third term, the Democratic Party was kind of like, no, that's not a good idea. And so eventually, this opened up the door for Harding to become president. And we're going to talk a little bit about his presidency. And it was very short lived, but we'll talk about it and kind of go into it. So we see that there was a lot of problems after World War One. We see a lot of the biggest issues were war debts and dealing with war-torn countries, issues that they were breaking. But in 1921, President Harding decided, I'm going to invite a lot of these powers to Washington's Naval Conference. They did leave out Russia because of what was happening to their country with the fall of the regime of their monarchy going communist. Russia was not really trusted at this point in time. And so we see at the conference, Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes urged that no more warships would be built for 10 years. Kind of be able to, well, one aspect of this is it helps the United States economically because we're not wasting money for military. Like, we don't need to build warships at this point in time. The other aspect of this is also it gets other countries to kind of scale back on their military as well. And we see Great Britain, Japan, France, Italy kind of scrap as well plans of warships. Your answer and to number 7 and your definition to Kellogg-Briand Pact is right here in yellow. So it went well. The delegation went well. I mean, people were excited. They cheered. They were very pleased with the agreement, that this was the first time that powerful nations agreed to disarm. We see that in 1928, 15 countries signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which renounced the war as a national policy. So how the pact was futile as it provided no means of enforcement, though. New conflicts did arose, though, when it came time for Britain and France to pay back the $10 billion they had borrowed from America. During World War One, they had borrowed a lot of money from America to pay for their expenses in World War One. Excuse me. But, after World War One, Germany owed those countries then money. However, and we started to see is that in 1922, America adopted what is called the Fordney-Macumber tariff, which raised taxes on the United States to 60%. This became a big problem because it was the highest level ever, especially following a war, which other countries owe you money. So may not have been the best plan. So the tax protected the United States, businesses, but it definitely made it very difficult for Britain and France to pay back that money that they owed. So there's your answer number 8. You might have to pause to write that down, but definitely made it hard to pay off their war debts to the United States. We do see Harding struggles during this time, or his administration struggles. So Germany was expressing a lot of inflation at this time. We see that their dollar was wasted because they printed way too much money. They ultimately defaulted on their loans to France, and France was so upset they were actually going to march in. And America's seeing this and going, whoa, 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 we cannot have another war, or we can't have another conflict going on right now in Europe. We need to find a way to shut this down. So they decide, Charles G. Dawes, who was an American banker, was sent to negotiate some loans. They came up with what is called the Dawes Plan. Your definition's there in yellow. American investors loaned Germany $2.5 billion to pay back Britain and France in annual payments on a fixed scale. Which then, what's funny is because once Germany and France get that money, they basically give it to sorry, Germany and France. Yeah, once Germany gets that money, they pay off Britain and France. Then Britain and France gives us that money to pay off their debts to America. So it's kind of funny. We're almost kind of paying ourselves, to be honest. But the solution caused resentment all around. We do see, excuse me, Britain and France consider the United States a miser for not paying fair share of costs of the World War I. Basically, they had felt that they should have taken on more responsibility than that they did, and unfortunately, it really upset a lot of European countries. So on domestic issues, Warren G. Harding had a very limited role for government and business affairs or social reform, but he still did what he could do with the Bureau of the Budget to help run government efficiently and urge U.S. Steel abandon a 12-hour workday. Warren G. Harding, your answer number 12 is right here in yellow, and number 10 is down here in yellow. We do know that Warren G. Harding did appoint Charles Evans Hughes as Secretary of State, who later went on to become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The president made Herbert Hoover the Secretary of Commerce, who had a lot of success during World War I when he was running what was it? The food, I want to say it was the FDA at that point in time, or it might have been the food department, but basically he was able to help with food distribution in World War I and had a lot of success there. You see Andrew Mellon, one of the country's wealthiest men, became Secretary of Treasury, set up a drastically cutting taxes, reducing the national debt. However, the cabinet also included so-called Ohio Gang, the president's poker-playing cronies, who would soon cause a great deal of embarrassment. So basically what happened is Harding becomes president, and a lot of his friends were like, hey, how can I get a job in your cabinet? And so he was like, okay, I'll give you a job here and there, even though they may not have been fit for the job. And that is what's going to ultimately set up a lot of scandals for Harding. Maybe picking your friends was not a good idea for these cabinet positions because a lot of them took advantage of it. And we see your definition for Charles R. Forbes is right here. Harding does not really understand a lot of the issues going on in the nation. He admit that too much of his secretary. So he was really a bit out of touch with society, with what was going on in the country. The Harding administration starts to unravel with corruption. We see a lot of these men that are in his cabinet are basically using grafts, which is basically raising money for purposes that were not used when were used for things that weren't intended for. So, for example, if I'm going to raise money, I'm going to raise money that's going to help me get reelected for president of the United States, or a congressman, or whatever, I'm going to help support other congressmen and women to get reelected. But I decide to take some of that money and use it for my personal gain, then that's what a graft is. I'm basically fooling and manipulating people, conning people into something that's not real. And so Colonel Thomas W. Miller, the head of the Office of Alien Property, was caught taking a bribe. So there's a lot of problems here, a lot of issues. One of the biggest ones is the Teapot Dome scandal. Basically, Teapot Dome scandal really put down a lot of the Harding administration. Teapot Dome, Wyoming, in Elk Hills, California, had a lot of oil-rich public lands in those areas, and were mostly with the U.S. Navy. But Secretary of Interior Albert B. Fall, which basically apparently the B in Albert B. Fall stands for bacon, which is funny. A close friend of various oil executives managed to get the oil reserves transferred to his department, the Interior Department, and then he secretly leased that land to Mammoth Oil Company for Teapot Dome, Wyoming. So although Fall claimed that they were, in the government's interest, they found out that he received $400,000 in loans, bonds, and cash. So he basically was getting a bribe, and he was found guilty of bribery, became the first American to be convicted of a felony while holding a cabinet post. Summer of 1923, Harding declared, "I have no trouble with my enemies, but my friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floor nights." And so what that quote says is basically that he kind of knew that his friends were doing some things that they probably shouldn't have been doing. And it was obviously causing some stress because not too long after that, in August 2nd of 1923, he died suddenly, possibly from a heart attack or a stroke on his return from Alaska. So maybe the stress of knowing that what was happening with his friends and all the corruption, this was going to get to him. We do see that Americans sincerely mourned the good-natured president, but the crimes were coming out, and it really put a damper on his administration. Now, Vice President Calvin Coolidge comes in, and he's a man respected with integrity, helps restore faith in the government and in the Republican Party. And then eventually Coolidge will get reelected for president the following year. But we will go into the Coolidge presidency in the next section. But definitely Calvin Coolidge is a very quiet, reasonable, respected man. But also, too, he is a man that may have come in a wrong time, where you see that he was one that was all about balancing the budget, protecting the budget, but instead he is one that will eventually make it very difficult to really push that message out, because during that time, as a man that is very conservative, very cautious about how he spends his money, how he values money, is going into an era where people are free to spend as much as they want with credit and with new products and inventions out there, that it's tempting people to be careless with their money. And so we're going to kind of get into that, which will then unfortunately set up a massive failure for Herbert Hoover. All right, but that's going to do it for section 2. We'll see you in section 3.